Author Bill Salus has written what I consider to be a very important book. And we'd like to welcome author, lecturer, Bill Salus to Prophecy Watchers today. Bill, always good to have you here.
Gary, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here, especially with this book here dealing with some very powerful end times prophecies.
Now, Bill, you've written 6 books. I could name them all, the Nuclear Showdown and Psalm 83, Apocalypse Road, the Now Prophecies, the Next Prophecies, and here's this one called the Last Prophecies. So you're sort of building as you go along.
Yeah, actually, this is the third book in a end time series. The goal is to sequence chronologically the unfulfilled end times prophecies between now and the second coming of Jesus Christ. So the Now prophecies dealt with those prophecies that could happen at the present time. They lack preconditions. The next prophecies had some minor preconditions, but we see them stage setting right now. And then the last prophecies take the reader right into the tribulation period, that time period that is when God pours his wrath out on a Christ-rejecting humanity, and there is so much written about in the tribulation that we're going to turn that into 2 volumes. So this book here is the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period.
And you and I had a little discussion before we came on today, and as we were talking, we talked about how complex all this is and how people may have the attitude, I've heard this all before in different ways and in different iterations, and some people look at it this way, some people look at it that way. And I don't know, I'm not sure that anybody ever really knows for sure. And the question evolves, why should I care about these things?
Right, and they do, I hear this all the time, Gary, and the reason it's prompted is because it comes typically from a believer who says, listen, I believe I'm going to be raptured before the tribulation period. Why should I care? And listen, I would say to you, if you're one of those people that has that concern or that thought, it's exciting. Yes, we are saved from the wrath through Jesus Christ, if you're a believer, Romans 5:8-9. Jesus is who delivers us from this wrath and the tribulation. That's also in 1 Thessalonians 1, verse 10. He will keep us from the hour of trial. This is exciting scriptures and promises we have that comes upon the whole earth, and that's in represents tribulation. And he did not appoint us to the wrath. But you know what? Some people are appointed to that wrath. And so, and that's in 1 Thessalonians 5, 7, and 10. And then comfort one another with these words, Gary. I mean, come on, how exciting is that? If you're a believer in Jesus Christ right now, you're not appointed to the wrath of God. But I ask this when I talk at conferences and churches about this sensitive subject matter, prophetic subject matter. Raise your hand if you know someone in your family. It could be a child, it could be a spouse, it could be a grandchild, it could be a neighbor, a coworker that is not saved.
Right.
That if the rapture would happen in the very near future, and it very well could, look at what's going on in the world, folks, you that are watching. That's why you care, because there's no, you wouldn't even want your worst enemy to go through the things that we're about to talk in this show that I cover in this book.
And we're going to be talking now about the Last Prophecies, Book 3 in a series that Bill has written. And I think he's refined the prophetic picture down to, I think, a great deal of detail. And as he mentioned, the detail is worth studying. It really and truly is, because you'll be equipped to go out and talk to other people about what is in our immediate future.
Absolutely. And that's one of the goals with this book and the whole book series, is trying to equip you folks to be able to be a better witnessing tool for the Lord in these end times. These events are just starting to come together. The ancient parchments are about to roll off their parchments and pay down. Predictions roll off their parchments and pound down on the pavement. We're seeing it happen in the news with Iran and Damascus and all these sort of things going on. And Russia's now in the Middle East, etc. So that's the goal. Equipping you as well with this invaluable information to take that charge, give the world a biblical narrative and prophetic perspective. They're just only hearing the secular world.
I'm on page 12 of your book. There's disaster in Iran, destruction in Damascus, final Arab-Israeli war, toppling of Jordan, terrorization of Egypt, emergence of exceedingly great Israeli army. Now, wait a minute. Who talks about the Israeli army? It's kind of a little local troop, isn't it? A little group that sort of guards Israel's borders. It's not a great army, but the Bible says it's going to be a great army.
Well, you know who talks about a great army? Ezekiel 37:10 says that they will be an exceedingly great army.
Yeah.
Jeremiah 49 verse 2 says that the army will desolate Ammon Jordan. It'll be a desolate mound. Isaiah 17:9 says that they will actually destroy Damascus and desolate other strong cities. So the Bible talks about this great army. What Gary is reading is, we recap the Now and the Next Prophecies books in the first chapter of the Last Prophecies book. So if you didn't have those books, and we advise that you want the whole series, you can actually kind of step right in through reading that into the book.
That opens the book, and so let's start with the first point that you would consider vital to understand.
Well, what we do right in the beginning of the book is we go through these timelines. People like timelines, they like images, and we have these all laid out. And so we'll start, for instance, on the end times line, you have the church age. After the rapture, you have the tribulation. But wait a minute, let's insert a gap in there. Gary, we did a show on this before, and in the Next Prophecies book 2, we talk about it's not the rapture that starts the tribulation period.
There are just too many things to fit into a small space. So you have to begin to take a broader view. And you and I have talked about this in the past.
Yeah, there's a gap, and it's an unspecified amount of time.
Right.
But it's not the rapture that starts the tribulation. It's the confirmation of the false covenant. Now, you and I know that, and most all of our colleagues agree there's a gap. Some even say, yourself and myself included, this could actually be for a few years. It may not just be 24 hours or 30 days.
Right.
So in the next prophecies, I dare to explore what could fit into that gap. But now after that gap, you have the tribulation period, and the tribulation period is one of the most time-specific times pointed out in the Bible. You have a first half. It's mentioned as 1,260 days, 42 months, times and a half a time being 1 year, times 2 years, a half a time being a half a year, so 3.5 years. Then you have a midpoint of the tribulation period. A lot of stuff going on there. Then you have a second half, another 1,260, another 3.5 years. Then there's a 75-day interval period. A lot of people don't know what that is, Gary. We'll just briefly read in the proof text in Daniel 12 in just a minute. And then you have the millennium, when Jesus reigns over the earth for 1,000 years. But in the first half of the tribulation, which is the prophecies covered in this book, we talk about Israel will probably have a carryover of burning those weapons for 7 years after the Gog and Magog invasion in Ezekiel 38. You have signs and lying wonders, because Satan's no longer going to be restrained. There'll be supernatural deception. The harlot world religion, mystery Babylon will emerge on the scene. The 144,000 Hebrew witnesses, we'll talk in one of the shows about the mystery behind their names and the misordering of their names. They'll prompt a worldwide Christian revival. Well, that's one of the good news, folks. If you're concerned about a loved one and they do get left behind, there will be a worldwide revival. That's one of the aspects of the tribulation period. Christian martyrdom, though, by the harlot.
Right.
That happens in the first half of the tribulation, and I believe in that gap as well. The third Jewish temple, that'll be in existence at that point in time. And boy, there's a lot of people excited about that at the present time, because they're even minting coins with King Cyrus and Donald Trump on that. The two witnesses, we're going to talk about them in this show. The seal judgments, the trumpet judgments, they correlate in time frames with the two witnesses, so we'll talk about the timing and what they are. The unholy harlot and Antichrist alliance, and then the 10 kings.
Now, what you're naming is a list of absolutely certain developments. They're certain because the Bible talks about them, and what the Bible says is guaranteed to come to pass. Believe me, a lot of people have not thought so, and a lot of people have wailed and gnashed their teeth later on when these things actually came to pass. In the Old Testament days, a lot of enemies of Israel had to change their minds in a hurry.
That's right.
And this is the thing about Israel right now. I think most people think of Israel as a secondary power. Like, oh yeah, it's interesting, and there's this thing about the temple and so forth and so on. But what's really happening is happening in the United States, in China, in Europe, and so forth and so on. Israel's not that important, but for us, it's extremely important.
Oh yes, for us, because we're watching that as one of the most pivotal signs that the world hourglass made its final spin when Israel became a nation again, And we're seeing these prophecy stage set that are
Right.
so Israel-centered. And one of the chapters in the book early on is, what does Israel look like in the
Right.
first half of the tribulation period?
Yeah, and I've read this chapter, by the way, and it's extremely informative, and by the way, very interesting too. You'll be, I think, pulled along by some of the things that Bill has to say.
It's not the little tiny Israel now that's the size of New Jersey. Something happens as we go through the wars that happen, the destruction of Damascus, those now prophecies you were reading, where Israel actually expands territorially.
Right.
And they become greater and wealthier. And of course, Russia wants to come after that with its coalition with Turkey and Iran coming for that great plunder and great booty. I actually put Psalm 83, some of these Arab-related prophecies, and Ezekiel 38 prior to the tribulation period. So Israel's defense forces win the Arab wars around them, not just Psalm 83, but the peripheral prophecies within that, the destruction of Damascus, the toppling of Jordan, etc. Then Ezekiel 38 happens, and God stops that. Fire, great hailstones, and brimstones. And so Israel now all of a sudden is very powerful. They're burying the dead for 7 years, it says in Ezekiel 39, gaining world renown, and they're expanding territorially. They're building their temple. So that Israel is Israel we're envisioning in the first half of the tribulation. When we go through some of these timelines, and these are in the book, people, because like we said, timelines are so helpful for people. In the midpoint of the tribulation, we have the death and resurrection. I mean, there's no shortage of things going on in the middle of the tribulation. There's a lot going on in the first half and the second half. And by the way, just as before I get into that, I want to say, my goal when I sat down, Gary, to write this book was to cover this book and end it all up in one volume, the last prophecies of all the tribulation. 300 pages later, I realized I need to stop. We're going to have this big volume here, and that's fine. But we're trying to keep these in, little short reading books for the now, next, and the last prophecies. So I had to go and just go the first half. But the next book is going to have to be dealing with the middle and the second half and that 75-day interval, because there's stuff going on in all those compartments. And so we have at the midpoint, you got the death and resurrection of the Antichrist, the desolation of the harlot by the 10 kings, the death of the two witnesses, of course they resurrect and ascend to heaven, the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, the false prophet comes on the scene at about that time, the image of the beast, the mark of the 666 starts coming in right around that time, a war in heaven, Satan is cast down to the earth as he loses and a third of his angels come. Persecution of Jews start coming as Antichrist starts to commit a genocidal campaign. And the seventh trumpet judgment sounds the three woe judgments, the third woe judgment, which is the bowl judgment. And then there's no shortage of prophecies in the second half of the tribulation, commonly called the Great Tribulation. Now, if you're watching this at home, or on your computer, and you're hitting stop and you're trying to write all these things down. These timelines are in the book that Prophecy Watchers is offering. The second half of the tribulation, 3.5 years, very specific, 1260 days, 42 months, times and a half times. Same repeat things alluding to that specific second half. There'll be a woman in the wilderness in Revelation chapter 12. The 7 bowl judgments, and these are worse than the judgments of the seals and the trumpets that have preceded them. There'll be the 8 stages of the Armageddon campaign with the Antichrist assembles his allies, the destruction of commercial Babylon, the fall of Jerusalem. The Antichrist and his armies go to Petra, Jordan to come after the faithful remnant, the natural regeneration of Israel, the second coming of Jesus Christ. Hallelujah for that. That's going to happen at the end of the Great Tribulation. The battle of the Valley of Jehoshaphat and Christ's victory ascent up to the Mount of Olives. Now we get into this 75-day interval. Well, 75-day interval, I took for granted. A lot of people don't really even know what that is, Gary. What is that really? Because there's no shortage of prophecies in that. And we turn to Daniel 12, verses 11 and 12.
And Daniel 12:11 says, and it's quite literal. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, that means there's going to be a daily sacrifice. And the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So you couldn't be more specific than that.
Right. 1260 in the second half of the tribulation, but now he's talking about 30 more days.
He is. In the next verse, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 days. So there is an interval. You have 1,290 days plus a month, if you will, and it's roughly, and it's going to happen. It's laid out.
Right, and then he goes on to say, blessed is he who can wait till the 1,335 days.
Right.
So the simple math is 1,260 days of the second half of the tribulation, so 1,335 days minus 1,260 75-day interval. And he says, blessed is he who can wait till that point in time, because the things going on in there are as follows, and you'll see why blessed is he who can wait for that. They're going to see the Antichrist and the false prophet cast into the lake of fire during that window period of time. Satan's going to be bound for 1,000 years in the bottomless pit. There'll be that sheep and goat Gentile judgment in Matthew 25, and if you're not familiar with that, there'll be sheep Gentiles who will be saved and go into the Messianic kingdom. The first resurrection of the Old Testament saints, the resurrection of the Tribulation saints, the marriage supper of the Lamb. This is a very important 75-day interval, and then of course you go into the Messianic kingdom. So I know we laid out a lot of prophecies, rapid fire, but we compartmentalized them for you. These timetables images are in the book, but this is what you don't want your loved ones to be facing, folks, when you understand how enormous the world of catastrophic events take place during these prophecies.
And we tend to listen to secular authorities on what's going to happen. And if you listen to the secular authorities, they talk about the rising sea level, they talk about global warming, they talk about famine, because the world won't be able to raise enough food. We'll pollute our atmosphere with petroleum products, et cetera, et cetera. That's all anybody's talking about. And so that's the focus, if you will. That's secular prophecy. They're prophesying all these horrific things, totally ignoring Bible prophecy, which is the real thing.
That's right. And there's so much going on now that the news is so important. We're watching it. But when you watch the news, your favorite channel, whichever one that may be, you're going to get these pundits and these military analysts and politicians. Right. They're going to give you their best shot, bless their hearts, at what they think trends lead to and where this goes. But you don't have to rely on that. You have the biblical narrative and the prophetic perspective, and that's what Gary's talking about. We need to be in our Bibles daily, understanding our world around us right now.
Yeah, and this is Bill's book. I mean, this is what he does. He talks about what's actually going to happen according to the Bible, not what some professor at some college has to say about global warming.
Absolutely. So can we talk about the two witnesses? These guys are incredible when you really start to unpack their situation, Revelation chapter 11.
Right.
We want to go there at this point?
Let's do that.
Okay, well, the Revelation 11 takes us into the first half of the tribulation, and John is measuring the temple. While he's measuring the temple, he talks about harlot Gentiles treading over Jerusalem for 3.5 years, 42 months. And then he says while this is going on, there'll be these two witnesses prophesying in Jerusalem for 1,260 days. And it says, I will give power in Revelation 11:3. Are you at Revelation 11?
I am.
Would you read Revelation 11:3? Talk a little about these guys.
I just happen to be looking at it right now. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days. That's 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. That sackcloth reference is very interesting because the Old Testament priests and prophets would throw dirt upon themselves and wear dirty clothing and cry out to God, woe is us because of all these things that have come upon us. That sackcloth means that it's going to be bad.
It's going to be bad, and it also gives us historical precedent, which might help us identify who these guys are.
Yeah.
These two new faces, some people say they could be Enoch and Elijah. Some people say they're Enoch and Elijah and Moses.
Right.
So we'll look at that. Read verse 6 too, and then I'm going to kind of give them a little unpacking.
Yeah, the two witnesses have a certain kind of power, and believe me, it's powerful. These have the power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. That's kind of like Elijah had that kind of a power in his day. And have power over waters to turn them to blood. Remember Moses?
I remember Moses. Yeah.
And
the Nile.
The next sentence, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will.
So these are busy, powerful people dressed in sackcloth prophesying.
And if you hear the word plague, you don't want to hear the word plague. That's no good.
No, and that's going on in the first half of the tribulation through these guys, through trumpet judgments. We're going to try to cover that as much as we can in the show, concluded these two things.
And again, we're talking about, and Bill, I think it has a heart for this. I think the Lord has laid it on him to sound a warning. This is what the Old Testament prophets did. But you're doing it in a lot more detail because you have a lot more information, if you will, because we have all of the artifacts of the past right up to the present and then looking into the future, and it's all laid out.
And there's been a lot of good work done on the tribulation prophecies from other colleagues of ours, and I've had the opportunity to glean through some of those commentaries and look really closely and unpack these scriptures. I put quotes in this book from Fruchtenbaum and Hitchcock and others who have really done a good job at studying a lot of this stuff as well as my different camera angles on this sort of thing. So what we have, just sort of we go through, we're not going to read all the verses of the two witnesses, but verses 3 and 6, he talked about their prophesying, and they got the plagues. They prophesy for 1,260 days. They live in harm's way because people are trying to kill them because they're tormenting people, but they can't kill them. And those who try to kill them, it talks about them. Read verse 5. It's worth reading to them.
Yeah, if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. And if any man shall hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. That's off the charts. Who's ever seen a thing like that?
Right. And so they're going to try to harm them, but they won't be able to. And in response, they're going to be taken out with fire proceeding out of their mouths. I mean, come on, this is a big time thing, right? They're going to lie dead in the streets of Jerusalem for 3. They'll be killed by the Antichrist. Let's start right there. No one will be able to harm them, but the Antichrist will kill them. And they'll lie dead in the streets for 3.5 days. They will then resurrect, and they will ascend to heaven, and they will torment all those believers who dwell on the earth. That's in verse 10. So they're in Jerusalem, but they've got a worldwide devastating effect of tormentation. And they'll be, after they resurrect, they'll be instrumental in causing many Jews, because there'll be a big earthquake, and people will actually come to recognize the Lord. So they'll be effective in that way. But who are these two guys? This is one of the questions, and what are the evidences we have that they really could be Moses and Elijah? That's who you think they are. Am I correct,
Absolutely.
Gary?
I've thought that for a long time. Elijah, and I think that Jesus himself talked about Elijah when he referred to John the Baptist, and that he also saw Elijah at the top of the Mount of Transfiguration standing alongside Moses. And some of the disciples saw the same thing. And for them to have seen Moses and Elijah is kind of a foreshadowing, I think, of what happens in the tribulation.
Absolutely. And in the book, I put those arguments and a few more. I talk about the two new faces and why that's not likely in the book. I talk about Enoch and Elijah, not likely. The evidence points towards Moses and Elijah. Like you said, Mountain of Transfiguration in Matthew chapter 17.
Right.
They had the similar supernatural powers. Many of you have heard these arguments before. Elijah went up in a whirlwind and never died in 2 Kings.
Right.
So, Malachi said he would return before the dreadful day of the Lord, Malachi chapter 4. The interesting thing with Moses, though, and you say there's let me read this, and then you tell me what you heard about the Jewish tradition on Moses, but in Jude 1, verse 9, there's a dispute between Satan and Michael the archangel over the whereabouts of the body of Moses. Could this imply that Satan is concerned about his return? He returned to the Mountain of Transfiguration, right? And so, but you were saying Jewish tradition holds that he really never died.
Yeah, and the Bible refers to being carried away by the angels, and Jewish commentary is full of this, much more so than Gentile commentary, that angels bore away the body of Moses and into a state that we might call suspended animation. And in fact, later on, there is an argument over Moses' body that we've talked about many, many times. Mm-hmm. Why would you argue over something dead? I think that Moses was probably in what we might call a state of suspended animation, or some special state, being kept alive for the last days, because I think he certainly comes back.
And why is Satan arguing where's the whereabouts of his body?
Right.
And that's a legitimate concern that got mentioned in some precious real estate of the Bible in Jude. So there is a genuine concern from Satan's camp about him.
And I think what I would like to say, and I think I'm catching Bill's drift on this. Bill would like for you to know that it's not going to be the world we live in now. Things will have risen to the next level, if you will, of spirituality. Right now, you can take it or leave it. You can go to work, come home. Everything is normal, quote unquote. In those days, Bill, normal is going to be something entirely different.
We had this conversation before we came on to the air here. We're concerned about the generation right now is not really getting the brevity of the information we're talking about. Right. Not just the now and the next prophecies, but if they get left behind, our loved ones get left behind. this world is going to be devastating. We're going to lay out some of the trumpet judgments, the woe judgments, with the 5 months of the demonic locust, the 200 million man army. Who are they, and that sort of thing. What are these plagues? What is Moses and Elijah, if this is them prophesying about? Who are they impacting, and that sort of thing? But here's the point you and I are concerned about. It's going to take the fulfillment of some biblical prophecies, probably some of the now prophecies, and come and encroach upon the average American's life before they're probably going to start to pay attention to that biblical narrative and that worldview. They're just going paycheck to paycheck. They're living their lives right now. They're, okay, that's Middle East stuff. That's not going to affect me, this sort of thing. But you know what, folks? Something like that's probably going to happen real soon, because these things are going to pack a powerful punch, and they're globally impacting these end times prophecies. And then it's too late. You cannot, once Pandora's box has been opened, birth pangs, things start to happen soon and sequentially with more intense frequency, and you cannot stop them. They're going to happen.
Today, everything spiritual is explained away in a sci-fi motif. Everybody sees the sci-fi movies of all kinds, and I mentioned them before. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, this, that, the Avengers. All of these people have powers of various kinds, superpowers, if you will, and it's all thought of as fictional. The Bible is the authority on superpowers. And when it talks about superpowers, you better listen because you want to be on the right side during those days. And Bill, those days are not far away.
They're not, Gary, and the Bible has more information said about the final generation, the terminal generation, than any other generation and even the time of the first coming of Jesus Christ. So, this stuff is coming on us rapidly. And when it comes, it's going to be overpowering and overwhelming.
The book, The Last Prophecies. The prophecies in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation by Bill Salus. We're offering it to you for your gift of $20. Free shipping anywhere in the United States. And by the way, go to prophecywatchers.tv. Click on the online library and just scroll down till you find Bill's name. You're going to find this offer, The Last Prophecies. And the thing that Bill has done, and I think it's unique, is he has in very great detail talked about the things that are going to happen and how they're going to unfold in a way that once you read it, there will be no doubt in your mind about the sequence of events. By the way, as we do here at Prophecy Watchers, we often put things into packages, and I have on my right a stack of 6 books, and they are The Last Prophecies, The Next Prophecies, The Now Prophecies, Psalm 83, Apocalypse Road, and Nuclear Showdown. Bill's written these 6 books. The Last Prophecies, of course, is the one we're talking about right now, but all of them for your gift of $50, free shipping anywhere in the U.S., and that's a lot to read, but it's very valuable reading. And Bill, keep it up. Keep up the good work.
Absolutely. We're done already. We didn't even get to talk about the trumpet judgments and how they correlate with the timing of the 2 witnesses. We didn't get to talk about the mystery and behind 144,000 Jewish witnesses, the worldwide revival. We'll have to cover that in the next show, Gary.
In the next show. And so be with us. I'm Gary Stearman, along with Bill Salus, saying, hey, you keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter, or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.